Welcome, fellow Jayhawks, to Bachelor's in Science Investigating Careers interview series. Today, we have with us Creighton, a KU alumni, who will share some tips and advices for students working toward getting a Bachelor's in Science. So thank you, Creighton, for being with us today.
Thanks for inviting me, Hannah.
Yeah. So first of all, please tell us a little bit about yourself and your career position and the company that you're representing.
Sure. My name is Creighton Miller, and I am an analytical chemist. So I graduated from the University of Kansas in 2011 with a degree in chemistry. I went from the KU School of Engineering, mainly focusing in chemical engineering, and eventually moved over to finishing with the chemistry degree. I also spent some time in the You Can Teach program that was going on at that time. I don't know if that's still a thing. But yeah, now I work as an analytical chemist. I'm currently a contractor working for Bayer. So there's a little bit of a gray area there. I work at the Bayer site in Shawnee, but I'm not technically employed by them. And maybe we'll get into some of the details about the weird way that business impacts science and things like that. But that's what I do currently. I work in the R&D department there, and the site in Shawnee is almost exclusively animal health products. So things for both companion animals like dogs and cats, as well as other animals like sheep and pigs and cows and things like that.
Great. And what attracted you to this career path?
So you've given me these questions in advance, so I've had some time to think about it. It kind of sent me down some memories, and I'm probably like a lot of people my age who grew up seeing things like Bill Nye and other programs like that, and I think that sent me into the environmental science side of things, and that led me to the engineering department and chemical engineering. And then when I was in the engineering department, I found that that there wasn't as much enthusiasm for the romanticism of the science as much as there was in the proper chemistry department. And so that was one of the things that led me to move over there. And then right out of school, I was having a pretty confusing time figuring out how to turn a degree into a job. And I worked for a waste disposal service called Tredebi, which is kind of like Clean Harbors. If any of you watching want to Google that. And then I ended up at a company called Catalent, which is down near the Triangle in Kansas City, Missouri, which is a contract research organization. And that's where I really cut my teeth in the lab, in a proper GMP pharmaceutical lab. And yeah, that's when I really became an analytical chemist. I had a lot of good experiences in the final couple lab classes at KU, and I think that really gave me a good foundation to understand analytical chemistry and understand what actually mattered. Does that answer that question?
Yes, thank you. And going along with that, as a follow-up, what are some of the biggest rewards, or what do you enjoy the most about being in the career or position that you're currently in?
So it's a good mixture, I think, of being able to work with your brain and your hands, and so that's a thing that I value a lot. A career that takes into account that I'm not going to be young forever, and eventually what I can contribute physically is going to be less than what I can contribute mentally. And so a career in science, specifically analytical chemistry, you get to actually touch what you're doing. You're not only working on a computer, but there's going to be a path for you when you can no longer throw stuff around in a warehouse or work outside or things like that. So thinking long term, that's a real plus. And there's a real magic. Those of you who are interested in sciences probably already feel this, that some of the time when you're in the lab, you're really touching the thing that you've learned about, and that's a cool thing to experience.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thanks for sharing about that with us. And I'm wondering what previous professional and or personal experiences have helped you most in your current career?
So there's a big difference in my industry between GMP and non-GMP work. And tell me if that is something that I should define.
Yes, please. So it would be great.
So GMP stands for Good Manufacturing Practices, and the FDA and many other organizations expect a certain level of quality from people who make drugs or medical devices, and this is defined by the term good manufacturing practices, and that is, it sounds really vague because it is intended to be really flexible and really progressive, so that anytime that technology moves a little bit forward, the FDA understands this is a better way to be doing the things that we've been doing already. Then any company throughout the world who wants to sell in the US is expected to see that bar, figure out how to get there and reach it. So that's what that means. Now, when you, in the whole pathway between discovering some sort of molecule that has potential as a pharmaceutical to bringing that to market for real, there's a lot of steps, there's a lot of gray areas, and the super high level of quality doesn't necessarily have to reach all the way down to the lab at KU, for example, because you've got to give those people at the very beginning the freedom to find things out and do really rough experiments. So all that is background. When you work for one of these final companies who are determining shelf life of a pharmaceutical, or determining the efficacy of that pharmaceutical, or after all of that has been figured out, and you're just making sure that what you've made is good and putting it into a bottle and sending it to Walgreens, those folks have to live up to that high standard all day, every day. So those GMP analytical chemists, they have to be rule followers of the highest degree. And so in those kinds of environments, the person who will succeed is the person who is happy to follow the rules, paying very close attention to every single detail, double checking things, asking for advice from people who have done this thing before they even try it for the very first time. Whereas in the initial stages of that drug process, the people who will succeed are the people who want to put in long hours. They want to get in at 6 and stay until and stay until 7 p.m. And they're just throwing stuff against the wall. They're trying to get as much done as possible in as little time. Um, it you would be much better served in those initial stages by somebody who is trying to get through things more quickly, whereas somebody in the later stages of drug development, you'd be much better served being somebody who is paying super close attention, never missing any detail, always dotting their I's and crossing their T's. So in my career, I've worked at both of these kinds of companies, and it was a real shift in the way that I had to think about what I was going to do every day. So I would keep those things in mind, and not that you must be only one of these kinds of people, but that when you work for this company, you need to change the way that you're thinking about your day. And when you work for this company, you need to change the way that you're thinking about your day. So that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. I think those are very valuable information and advices for students to know. Talking about being flexible, being detail oriented and being flexible depending on what the work expects you to do. So following up with that, what are some of your tips on how to stand out amongst other applicants for when they apply for a position such as the current one that you're in right now, or a position in the career field? And how would they stand out during interviews?
Okay. So I have some strong opinions about this, or maybe I have one opinion about this. I think that this should be a class, or I think that it could be offered by some group like the Career Institute. The number one thing that you can do to get a job in this industry, and probably every single industry, is to know someone who's already in there. So the number one thing that I would advise for you watching is know people in the classes above you. Make sure that they know you. Find some way to demonstrate that you are someone that they even just want to be around. Better yet, if you can convince them in even a small way that you are someone who would provide value to something that they're trying to do, and that can be as small as being someone who's easy to talk to, or who always has something intelligent to contribute to a conversation. Knowing someone, even if it's a pretty rank and file person, can really go a long way for you. In addition to that, you're probably watching this as a senior, but if you could start over as a freshman, if I could start over as a freshman, I would make sure that I had a big, diverse friend group, especially in the industry that I'm looking at, or in the group of majors that are similar to mine. On the interview day, I would be careful about what I wore and what I said. Your resume should have been thought over quite a bit. I think that KU already does a great job at this. I've changed the format of my resume very little since I left KU, and I think that's been great ever since then. And then I would spend some time working in some level of public speaking. It's not, especially in the sciences, you might present twice in undergrad, maybe a final project toward your junior or senior year, and maybe once in an English class that you were required to take. And that's about it. But you are going to be a person who is the center of attention across the table from one or two or three people who are trying to figure out your entire life story in the next 10 minutes. And that's a pretty challenging thing, especially for someone who has lived in Excel sheets and textbooks for the last 4 or 5 years.
Thank you. Thank you so much for highlighting those experiences that you think KU students should start working towards. Definitely the importance of networking. That's something that the Career Center has also been stressing some students on in general, actually, because we found out that like more than 50% of the jobs out there have been achieved through networks rather than, and they haven't necessarily been posted online. So that really highlights the importance of networking. Speaking of networking, I would want to highlight about the KU mentoring program that the KU Alumni Association has hosted. So if you are a fellow Jayhawk and you would like to get connected to another fellow Jayhawk and build up your network, that is an opportunity that all KU students have. And thank you so much for highlighting about the resumes and stepping outside of your comfort zone in regards to building networks and relationships with people of diverse communities. Thank you.
You're welcome.
So my next question for you is, you have mentioned building relationships with diverse groups, and I'm wondering, is there anything about your organization or your field that underrepresented students should know about?
The groups that I saw more and less represented at the collegiate level are the same groups that I see more and less represented in industry. So that seems to be about the same in that sense. It does seem like the older generations are hesitating to move on, and so most companies have a lot of older folks, and I think that is probably more of the same symptoms that any of you are thinking about regarding the economy. So that's the battle that I see now, is that folks are graduating and ready to take spots now that aren't immediately being left open by people who are moving up or moving on. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And to follow up with that, it seems that just reiterates the importance of building networkings within the industry as well. And also, what opportunities for post-graduation professional development exist in your career field? Or what kinds of professional development do you suggest students do as they pursue a career like yours?
Sure. So professional development supported or sponsored by your employer, as I've seen, is pretty limited. Maybe once or twice a year, somebody like me would have, the opportunity to go to something like a vendor presentation. So this is really specific to analytical chemistry, but in HPLC work, you will probably have the opportunity to see maybe like a one-day talk from Agilent or Waters or something like that, or Thermo. In Kansas City every year, there is a FDA presentation. I would search that out and look at that if you are anywhere touching the pharmaceutical industry. it seems to me that smaller companies are more likely to sign off or to financially support you attending things like that. Larger companies don't seem to have any incentive to invest in their employees. And so if I could be in your student's position right now making this decision again, I would more heavily consider getting this experience before I left college. I would look more into a master's or a PhD. I went away from that route because I saw that that a master's would prepare me to teach in junior college, and I didn't know what else besides that it would give to me. And I saw that a PhD was going to set me up to be a professor, and I didn't want to publish or perish. I didn't want to fight that battle. But I see far more opportunity for PhDs to work in pharma than I expected. And this is kind of one of those things that you watching are having a really hard time grasping what matters, what employees want, what will be opportunities for you in the future, and half of the answer out there is that you'll never know the opportunity that the future will bring, because something like a coronavirus will happen and change everything. Or the other half is that it's really hard to understand what companies out there need or want or prefer, and so that's one more reason that having a gigantic network is going to benefit you. So if you can know someone who is a couple classes above you, or someone who was your TA who has now moved on into industry, you might say, hey, if you were hiring somebody right now, would they need to be a PhD to do this and this and this, make this kind of money, things like that. I would say that if you are thinking that you want to be a sole breadwinner or something like that, you can't stop at a bachelor's anymore. Yeah, that's been my experience.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing your experience so far. And the last but not least question that I would like to ask you is, what is one thing that you wish somebody would have told you before going into this career field?
Sure. The first thing that I just mentioned previously is that just a BS and a hard science is not enough to fund a whole middle class family. I started at about 43,000, and moving up from that is pretty slow, and there's a pretty decent ceiling on that. A couple other things that I would have told myself. I was surprised at how office space feeling a lot of big pharma companies are. I didn't expect the culture to be so corporate. In smaller companies, it's less that way, but especially the pharma industry is very businesslike, and you won't get the same feeling that you get in KU at the lab. Not that the lab work is a whole lot different, but that the relationship between you and the person next to you is pretty different. Think more about getting a master's or a PhD. Okay. I'm in kind of a unique spot right now to be answering these questions, because I am going through prerequisites to go back to school, and I am I'm not committed to exactly what program that will be yet, but I know that myself at 22 had a much bigger difficulty doing the quality of work that I'm doing now, and so I think that that's a really complicated question for the people watching this. Continuing on into a master's or a PhD, if undergrad has been a slog for you, will seem pretty daunting, and you will probably be concerned that your GPA is already not good enough. I would say there is a version of you, at least the 30-something version of you, really can do school in a way that is different than you're doing it now. If you already have a great GPA, you're not asking these questions, but consider it more, and try to find someone who is in industry, achieving the things that you would like to achieve, and ask them what they think you should do.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing your own personal experiences. Everything that you've said just now, I think they do apply to a lot of KA students. And I'm really glad and thankful that you're able to share your experiences and your tips and advices and suggestions, and also giving us a sense of hope about graduate school, but possibly continuing graduate school, if not right away, but maybe in the future later, just to expand the opportunities that are available out there for them. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Creighton. This has been the Bachelor's in Science Investigating Careers Employer Interview Series. I'll see you again soon.